My guest today, Javvad Malik, is one of the people whom I most respect and admire in cybersecurity. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Not only is he a great professional with deep technical skill and like 2 decades experience, but he's also one of the kindest, most generous, and funniest people in this piece. And that sense of humor actually plays a crucial role in the impact that he has in the industry. So he's one of the most active bloggers in the space. He talks about all of the issues that we all care about, both you and me and him, and so many others who listen to this podcast. And he's been doing that consistently for many, many years. He's a leader in the cybersecurity awareness space, which means that he deals with people's habits and behaviors every single day. And he tries to help people through technology and processes and dedication to actually develop those behaviors and that mindset of what it means to interact with technology safely and just live, digital world in a way that feels comfortable and safe and, not limiting. And his observations on how cybersecurity is changing and who's shaping the conversations that we have in this space, and then the teams, products, and companies that we built, his insights are just incredible. His analogies, his examples are so relatable. Like, I found myself totally resonating with everything that he said. We talk about the rationality bias, we talk about the negativity bias, and we talk about victim blaming and a couple of other things that we see in this industry that both him and me, in our different ways, are trying to change. I can't wait for you to meet Javvad and follow his work, because he is one of the beacons of hope and optimism and positivity in this industry. And he got me thinking about a question that I'll take with me like every single day. Like, how do we make cybersecurity more fun for people? So here's what that means, and here's what potential positive consequences that might have. Enjoy. Javvad, I am absolutely thrilled for this conversation. As a definite fan of yours for a number of years, I just feel so lucky that I get to talk to you today about some of the things that you know, because talking about them all would probably take a lifetime. So welcome to Therapy.
Thank you so much. No, thank you. And the feeling's mutual. I love seeing everything that you do and all the great content you put out there. So thank you for inviting me. It's an honor.
The honor is all mine, especially because you bring not just incredible experience and a lot of experience in talking about these things and getting people to listen to conversations about topics that they might not necessarily be comfortable with, but especially the fact that you've been doing this so consistently over like so many years. What is it? Almost 2 decades now, particularly with cybersecurity, which is
Yeah, I feel old. Thank you. So, but yeah. No, when I started, it was so my first. I've only ever worked in cybersecurity as a career, and when I joined, it was IT security, and at the time, it was just like very. It was like I worked for a bank, and there was like about 8 of us doing IT security for the entire bank, and it was just like resetting passwords, setting up accounts, permissions on folders, monitoring a few basic things. There wasn't any SIMs, there wasn't anything fancy. And it was just like, no one even knew what you did. If you say IT security, people assumed you were watching CCTV cameras all day or something like that. It was just like, not a thing. And so it's really changed a lot over the years.
it really has. It's gotten a bit hairy, a bit complicated, but here we are, still doing the work. You more than anyone else, and something that I wanted to actually start with, because you have it right there in the background, is that you so playfully situate yourself at the like you said, the unholy alliance between information security and cynicism, wrapped in storytelling in YouTube. But you're the least cynical person I know, so I wanted to ask, like, what keeps you engaged and optimistic and energetic about doing this work, especially because you've seen so many repeating patterns and problems that we've yet to figure out and solve. So what keeps you kind of really alive and really motivated in your line of work?
Yeah, I think that's an important question because I think everyone needs that why in their life, that motivation or that driving force or that vision. Because if you're just following a career or you're just doing it for the money, that'll only take you so far and you'll just become complacent. And I'm not saying that's wrong. For some people, a career is just a job and that's it. But for me, I really really enjoy this industry as much as I have from day one, because A, I'm always learning something new, and B, I think as we've seen technology find its way into everyone's lives. It's not just about organizations now; it's everyone's personal lives. It's and all of our life is digital. It's just become such an important part, an integral part of everyone's life, and I feel like there's an obligation upon us to help people navigate that world. I think there's everyone trying to do the right thing. Developers are trying to do the right thing. There's people in user experience, but there's still this big gap between what your average non-technical, like people who don't work in technology, what do they understand about what is a cookie? Or when some banner pops up and it says you've got a virus on your machine, do they click on it? Do they not? There's all these things. We use all these terms and everything, and I think we have an obligation to help people understand what these things are and how they can educate themselves to make better, sort of like better risk decisions in their life in the digital realm.
And having that mission, that driving force, I feel like that's what keeps people working on these really complex problems, and not just technology problems, but especially figuring out how do we get people, well, how do we match our intention of helping them with what they actually need, with what they actually do, not try to get them to care about these things as much as we do, because that's not the goal here. We're probably not going to care about the work that they do as much as obviously they do, but to just get them to kind of integrate and build these things into their lives in a way that feels natural and a way that makes use of what they already know. Because we we always feel like the general discourse in cybersecurity sometimes is like, we want to teach you this new thing and you can pay attention. But it's not about that now, is it?
No, no, it's not. And
Um,
it just reminds me of this. I was having this conversation about with someone who's a big into movies, and they were talking about the new Marvel movies that are coming out, and how there's a lot of like kind of like superhero fatigue in some realms. But one of the interesting points that came up was that it, if you haven't seen all of the, say, like the Marvel movies up to now, you're lost because you don't know who these characters are, what their role is, what's this, what's that. So it's almost like you feel like you have to have a history degree in all the characters before you can enjoy this movie. And I think that ruins a movie going experience. You should be able to walk in with knowing very little and enjoy it. And I think that's where we are in technology to some degree. It's like we just throw these things at people and expect them that, oh, it's intuitive. Everyone knows that. But but that's like someone that's been reading comics all their life saying to someone, oh, you should understand the intricacies of all these characters and their narratives. And I think that's like, I thought that was such a good analogy of like where we are with security and getting people to understand.
that is so so good, and I felt that entirely because I do have like my best friends. They're super into the Marvel universe. They will unpack all of it for me, so they're kind of my Marvel awareness team. Which and they help me understand like why these characters are developing now and why they're doing this now and not earlier and things like that. And oh, I felt that on so many levels, honestly. And that brings us to something that you talked about over the years consistently, which is the curse of knowledge, which is something that affects us in this industry more than we realize, more than we acknowledge. And without someone kind of like holding up a mirror, we might get honestly just get even deeper and more lost in it. And that affects how we talk to people, what we expect of people, and just a general level of frustration with things. So, how do you handle that for yourself? And how do you think you might be able to start kind of just curbing it at least a little bit?
Yeah, this is really difficult because sometimes, especially if you go on technology news sites, you'll read a heading and it'll make perfect sense to you. But then you stop and then you read it again. You think, like, 5 years ago, if someone had told me this, I'd be like, what are these words and what do they mean? Like, AI causes NFT to, you know, crash value of Bitcoin. Okay, that makes sense in a way. We kind of like get it today. But 5 years ago, that would have been like, what does this mean? This is gibberish. Yeah. And what we need to understand is, like, when we speak amongst our peers, we almost use this our own language, and we get so bogged down in using these terminologies that don't make sense to anyone. So, and okay, there's a couple of things. One is, like, there's such a big influence of military jargon in cybersecurity, and so everything's like, oh, are you a red teamer or a blue teamer? And, like, are you doing this? What's a pen test? And, like, we're doing a code review and we need an audit. And there's so many terms out there that for us, it's just completely normal. But the problem is that those seep into how we create systems and the advice we give to people. So, you look at, you can ask anyone if you receive an email from a company saying there's been a breach and your credentials were impacted by it. What do they do? It's like, what do I do with this information? I do not understand. What is a breach? What do you mean that they compromised? What do you mean? What's the difference between a breach and a compromise and a hack? And, there's all these terms out that people don't understand. And this is where, like, the curse of knowledge is based on this, experiment in Stanford by Elizabeth Newton. And they done the tappers and the guessers game, which is like where one person has to clap out the tune to a popular song or a nursery rhyme and the other person has to guess it. And the thing is, when you're clapping out that tune, that's all you can hear in your head. All you can hear is that tune. But the other person is just like, these are just random taps. These are random claps. I have no idea. And the person clapping, they would make statements like, isn't it obvious? Like, how can you be so stupid? And that's very, very similar to what we do. Like, you hear so many people, like, go on about, like, stupid users, or it was obvious that the domain was misspelled, or how could they have believed that this was an actual legitimate request? So I think in that, as the name of your podcast, it's like empathy is of utmost importance. It's understanding that not everyone knows everything. Not everyone has the same information you have. Not everyone's aware of the terminology you use. Like, do they really need to know the difference between phishing, vishing, smishing, quishing, tishing, whatever? Or do we just want them to say, like, oh, someone might contact you through some means making an unusual request, asking you to do something that you don't normally do. And then if they're like aware of that, they can build the framework to make that choice themselves. I have a 6-year-old, nearly 7-year-old, and so I teach him how to cross the road safely. And we have something here called the Green Cross Code. You stop, look, listen, and cross. And I don't need to teach him how to cross every single road in the world. I just need to teach him the framework of how to think about what makes it safe to cross the road in terms that he would understand. Once I've taught him that, and that behavior is embedded, then I know that he will be able to safely navigate most roads anywhere in the world. He doesn't like, oh my God, Dad only taught me how to cross that road, but now I'm on this road. How do I cross it? That's not going to happen. And I think that's what we need to start thinking of more. We need to not be like so prescriptive and like this is what you need to do. These are the list of do's and don'ts, but try to help people understand what the context is of something and why there's a risk and what steps they should take to protect themselves before, during, and after. And if we can help them do that, that'll be, that'll be far more effective, because then you remove that whole curse of knowledge aspect from it altogether, because you've given them the bare minimum they need to make that informed decision. And then all the other things, the technical details or whatever, that's all like the fine print at the bottom. If someone's really interested, they can read what the terms and conditions are, but you don't need to give them that.
Exactly. I absolutely love how you explained this and how you tied it to some very real skills that we already have. We already know how to be safe in traffic and drive a car and avoid risk and avoid head-on collisions and other types of accidents. We already know how to choose food that's safe for us. Well, more or less. Debatable. We already have all of these abilities, but the limiting belief is that, but I don't have the skills that I need for this particular situation for dealing with cyber threats. But we actually do. It's just this limiting beliefs that's holding us back. And we see this not only, let's say, in people who grew up and matured before the internet. I'm actually one of the last generations that lived life before the internet. I'm very grateful for that, actually. But we also see this in younger generations who, although their entire lives are online and they've been using the smartphone since they were like 5 or something, they already know all of these things, but their, let's say, acknowledgement of risk is undeveloped, simply because they lived in a world where the internet was all over the place, where just everything was digital, and they lack these skills. So our job is definitely not done. It'll probably never be done. But getting to talk to them and to make them comfortable, I feel, with this idea and familiar, I think that that's the key to actually just getting them to again just want to engage in these types of behaviors and conversations, because we can be, like you mentioned, we can be prescriptive. Something that I learned is that, and this is from a book, but I can't remember which, is that adults do things because they want to, children do things because they have to. So unless people want to do these sort of things, we stand at zero chance of making a difference.
Yeah, I think
Sorry,
there is like the BJ Fogg model of like people's capability and prompt and desire to do something. And sometimes when we teach people about stuff, I think it's the behavior is what we're really after. And if they don't fully understand the why, it's not always that important. And it's a bit like recycling bins. Like they've architected it in many places where the recycling bin is right next to your normal bin. So it's a very easy choice. And there's a little nudge there. There's normally like, recycling here, paper in here, and general rubbish in there. And so it's an easy choice to do. Now, does it matter that I fully understand how me recycling will save the polar bears or prevent the Arctic sheets from melting? Maybe not. As long as I'm engaging in that behavior, and as a society we engage in that behavior, then we're going to reach something that's better. So sometimes it's like, it's like we just want the behavior, and if we create the right environment or empower people to make that right decision. So like with kids, like going back to the example you were saying, we sort of like teach them to be polite to everyone. But then at the same time, we also say, don't talk to strangers, which is kind of like the opposite. It's like, be rude to someone. Basically, some stranger comes out to you and says, do you want a sweet, or do you want to come into my van? You say to them, no, you do not talk to them. You engage, you yell, and you run away. So as long as they understand the behavior, we don't need them to understand, well, this person is a kidnapper for ransom. This person wants to sell your organs. This person wants, that's irrelevant information, and you're just going to overlook. You just want to know what's the behavior you want them to take, and I think we need to focus on that a bit more.
Totally agree with you. And that's why one of the reasons why I love reading your articles and hearing you speak on the podcast you do with Eric is that you have all of these great analogies and make it that create that connection for people between their lives and your work and what we do in cybersecurity. And because you work in cybersecurity awareness and you're a leader in this space, you run into these issues like all of the time. How do we build technology better? How do we build better programs to engage people, to help them, to support them? But talking about the system that keeps, keeps the curse of knowledge away, or at least to the to the minimum level that it can exist. How did you build this environment for yourself? Like, how do you expose yourself to experiences and people outside the industry? How do you stay connected to the realities of what people are experiencing in their daily lives behind the screen? I feel like that is such an important component, and we don't really talk about it often enough.
Yeah. I think one thing is it's like many technology sort of like sectors, people tend to get caught up in trying to reinvent the wheel a lot of times. And whilst we are using technology, we're not really solving tech issues, we're solving people issues, or we're trying to help people. And while the technology is new and possibly unpredictable, people are old and very predictable typically. We know the kind of behaviors people are going to go for. We know that people are lazy and they want the easiest solution to their lives. And we know criminals will always want money or power or what have you, and they don't get, these sort of things are there. So there's a vast, centuries of research already conducted on all of these things. Like, how do you, motivate people? How do you educate people? You look at advertising, you look at marketing industry, you look at architects, you look at, user design from, the ancient Greeks, or the user experience, how they did it, like underfloor heating, and works really well with marble, and all that kind of stuff. And so I think, like, to read or to study or to interact with people in these other fields is so useful. Even I think that's why TED Talks are really interesting, because now they've kind of become a bit formulaic, but especially the early ones, it's so interesting. You hear people from different lines of work and different parts of the world about their aha moment and what changed their life and how they enriched it, and what their perception is on a certain thing. And there's so many things out there you think, that's a really good idea, I'm going to just borrow that and implement it in my cyber world. And that's just how it works. I think there's just so much there that we can do. And you know what, it's so easy to make assumptions, and we're terrible at that. So why did the chicken cross the road? And normally people say, well, to get to the other side. But what if I say there's more than one chicken and it has more than one reasons to cross the road? All of a sudden, your initial answer of to get to the other side seems a bit like, well, that's not really a good answer. It's like there's peer pressure, there's wanting to fit in, there's a fox on this side, there's some food on the other side, there's all sorts of factors that come into play. And again, I think, like, it's really easy to say, like, oh, we've rolled out multi-factor authentication, but the uptick has been really poor. People just don't care about security. Well, no, maybe they don't understand what you've rolled out. Maybe the process is really complicated. Maybe they need to update software. No one wants to interrupt their day to update software. There's all these other factors at play there that, we sort of like ignore and throw out the window. And I think, like, by understanding the world at large, by looking at, why things work in a certain way. There was a car manufacturer, and cars, now most of them have these dimming lights on the inside, but before, you open the door and the interior light used to go on. and you close the door and the interior light just shuts off. And one car manufacturer, they started putting a interior light where you close the door, it doesn't immediately shut off, it dims and then shuts off. And they found when people took that car for a test drive, it would sell a lot more than the ones that didn't. It's a ridiculous thing. It's a ridiculous notion. Like, why would that sell more? And they attributed it to the cinema effect, that just before the movie starts, they dim the lights. It doesn't go. So you're conditioned, a bit like Pavlov's dogs, that something epic is about to happen, something great. You feel good. You know, you can almost taste the popcorn in, you know. And so that's what, when you sit in the car, you're behind the steering, when you close the door, it's almost like the light dims, you're the star of the movie. And psychologically, without people realizing, they would lean more towards that. And that's such a frivolous thing. It's such a minor thing. But now you think, okay, that has a big impact on how people act and behave. And that's something like no one in cybersecurity will ever tell you. So how can we make our cybersecurity controls or the path to do something? Have we ever thought about how do you make your user the main character in a movie? How can we make them like, you know, if like for me, if instead of like my multi-factor authentication and the token and everything, if you give me like 3 flick switches here, I have to like lift it up and go click, 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 like in a helicopter or an aeroplane, I'd be all over that. I'd be doing that every time. You don't need to ask me twice, because I'd feel like I'm in Top Gun or something. And so I think like you know, the more we expose ourselves to the world, the more we understand why certain things work well, why certain things are successful, why branding is so important. I think that's such an overlooked aspect of things. People associate with a brand, and they, you know, why don't you market your security team as a brand? What's your, you know, when people think of the security team in your organization, what do they think of? And it's either like, we don't know, the Department of No, we don't know where to find the policies, they're always getting in our way, they tell us off when we do something bad. You know, and we need to change that.
Thank you for that beautiful example and for like bringing up those emotions and those sensations that we associate with some of the most, let's say, exciting and interesting and fun experiences in our life. We don't have fun in this industry. I mean, we do maybe sometimes amongst ourselves, reminiscing like retro stuff from the movie Hackers, and you know, diving into the ethos, but that's not really visible for people outside this industry, or it's visible in a way that's a cliche. And just having that idea of like, just sitting with that question, like, how can we make this fun? How can we use words and humor, like you so beautifully do, to make things engaging and relaxing and give people that positive experience, which is something that you often talk about. We don't think about this. We're so sometimes sucked in by all the negativity and by looking at all the things that can go wrong, because it's part of the job. And I was talking to IPSEC a couple of weeks ago, and he said exactly this, like, we're so biased per negativity in this industry, and we need to intentionally do something about it. Otherwise, we'll just, well, when you're when you only have a hammer, you're going to see nails everywhere. And if we step outside that mindset a little bit, and like you said, look into all of these other disciplines and stories and research, which give us so much inspiration, we can find something there to make this experience for people one that's actually not draining, but rather something that could be fun, informative, make them curious, whatever it made them feel good about themselves, about others, and hopefully about the security team as well. Not the people who will constantly give you a slap on the wrist and tell you you're doing something wrong, but rather the people that are your team. They're your A team. You can go to them and ask them, and they'll be there to reply. Hopefully with a smile on their faces,
Yeah.
but not one of contempt,
Yes.
but one of actually, we're like, let's do this thing together. um, and when if we unpack this, there's another bias that you talk about, and that I think it's important to discuss. And I'd love your perspective on it, which is the rationality bias that we have in this industry. We're rational human beings, and we're always capable of making sound decisions with looking at the data. Emotions have no place in this space, and that's something that I want to personally challenge every chance that I get, and remind people that we're dealing with people and that we are people ourselves. So how do you do this, like, for yourself, and how do you help others do the same? Like, be aware that thinking we have this inclination to be rational is actually not true from a psychological standpoint, and we have a lot of scientific proof to show us that that's true.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that reminds me of that every day is when I look at my when I look at the weather app in my phone, and it says like it's 4 degrees. You won't be able to see it, but it says it's 4 degrees, but it feels like 2 degrees. So why does it say it feels like 2 degrees? We've measured it scientifically with all of our knowledge and everything, and it's a universally agreed standard. It's 4 degrees. Because even the weather app knows that as humans, we don't really care what the science says. If we feel like it's colder than 4 degrees, our bodies are going to say, "I don't care what your thermometer's saying. It's 2 degrees. I don't care." You know, and it just goes to show that, like, rational thinking or trying to prove everything through data doesn't always work, because the data has so many limitations and restrictions to it that it's good for a general consensus. But like you said, we're dealing with people, and individual people are really hard to address. And one of the problems with rational thinking is that the person with the best spreadsheet wins the argument. And so what you do, you never end up taking any risks. And when you look at some of the, good inventions or discoveries of our world, many times it's through a accident or trial and error. Why? Because someone's given the freedom to just experiment. And many times, if you ask a scientist who's in the experimental phases, yes, they've got a hypothesis or two, but they're really just like flinging stuff and seeing what sticks and what works and what doesn't work. This is how, like, penicillin was discovered, one of the greatest medical breakthroughs in our life, in our generation. So, the problem is, like, if before accidentally discovering penicillin, if they were told, "Oh, you need to write a business case, show us what you're working towards, what you're trying to get, and then, we're only going to fund you for this period of time." Yes, it's a very rational business decision, but you're losing out on so much. And this is why, like, when one thing I don't understand is, like, when you look to book a flight, the assumption that the airlines make is that you're only caring about two things, really. It's like the cost of the flight and the flight duration. And so that's the only things that are displayed, sort by price or departure or the time. Yeah, like, departure time and arrival time. So you can sort by what's the cheapest flight, and you can sort by what's the quickest flight or departs. And what they forget is that there's so many other factors that people want to take into consideration. So I, I personally, if I know there's a flight that has got a widescreen TV with more movies on it and a USB jack or something that I can charge my devices with, and it's one of those newer planes which has got Wi-Fi on it, I might actually choose that, even though it might be at a less convenient time where it might cost a bit more, because, hey, it's a newer plane. I like it. I know the cabin's quieter and all these intangible things. People have different quirks and what have you. But because you're rationally thinking people only want X and Y, you miss out on the opportunity to sell them on so much more. And I think with the rationality bias as well, what I think it ends up being, and I often ask my myself this question whenever I get into an argument, or not an argument, but you sometimes get into a debate with someone over like what length the password should be, or what controls best, or whatever you. And I'm always something I ask myself repeatedly is, do you want to be right or do you want to be helpful? And those things aren't always the same. And so sometimes I think most of the time I believe it's better to be helpful and to put your ego aside. And I think it does become a bit of an ego thing. This is the way we've always done it. We know it best. We're the experts. But when people tell you that, no, this is how we prefer it, it's better to be helpful.
It always is. It always is. And thank you for making it so clear that this rationality bias can be so limiting sometimes, and just again cultivating our abilities to relate to other human beings, whether it's in the form of like empathetic behavior or listening or asking questions, which are kind of skills that fall under this, actually expands our perspectives. It gives us so much more insight, so and quicker access to potential solutions, honestly, just by listening to people, just by hearing them out and not just thinking about the next thing that we want to tell them in argument, so we can win it. So that is really, really helpful to have that level of just openness, open-mindedness, I guess. And I really appreciate that you and Eric wrote a book that's called 50 Ways to Survive and Thrive in Cybersecurity, which I absolutely love, where you focus on these non-technical aspects of the work that we do in cybersecurity, especially as technical specialists. And the way you phrase things in there, it wasn't just engaging and fun, and your sense of humor, both of yours comes through really well, and it's such a wonderful read, but it's also so very thoughtful and asks a lot of great questions. And I was wondering what kind of feedback you got after you put this book into the community, and if there were any types of, let's say, surprising things that you learned as a result of people reading the book.
So yeah, first off, I have to give Eric kudos here. I don't actually give him enough kudos. I normally roast him on whenever we do our podcast and what have you, but he was a fantastic collaborator on a book, and I think finding people who you work with really well, I think that was one of the first learnings. Like, there's so many times like you try to do your project with someone or a presentation or something, and it just you have such different styles that it doesn't gel together. But with Eric, it worked really, really well. And he really contributed a lot to, half the book, really. In terms of the feedback has been, generally, it's been very positive. People have really appreciated the look into the fact that it's a non-technical. I think that's a big thing. Like, I think we kind of underestimated how many people would actually be interested in a book on cybersecurity that has nothing to do with the technology side, and it's more about helping them build their skills, or how to perceive things, or how to manage their relationships with their managers, or with their peers, or with their across the organization. And we also wanted to encourage people to find their voice and to share their thoughts. And and this is like, a couple of people actually came up to me afterwards, or they contacted me afterwards, and they were like, okay, I really liked it, and I want to blog, but I don't know what to write about. And I'm like, it doesn't matter what, don't let that be a stumbling block. Even if all you're starting is by saying, I'm looking at this and I don't understand it, but here's all I understand about it now. And I said, just post it as a blog, and you will see so many people will resonate with that. They will say, like, I'm in exactly the same position. And then so many people will also say, like, have you considered this? Here's how this worked for me, or here's how I understood it, or here's a link to a thing. And then you can update it afterwards. And that's how you learn, and you show to others that this is what the learning process is. None of us know the answer to everything, but we need to show that we have the ability to work through and figure out what the answers are. And if we can share that journey, that's always so, so inspiring. There's a good friend of mine, he's a CISO, and he was recently at an event, and he put a post on LinkedIn saying how he suffers from a bit of social anxiety and he felt a bit awkward and what have you, but it was a good event and everything. And the comments underneath it were like, so many people like, we had no idea. You're such a senior person in the industry. You're such a good leader, this, that, the other. We had no idea you suffer from social anxiety. I do too. And I think that representation and, just putting those messages out there is so, so important. And it really helps people.
It really does, and I love that more senior people are just sharing with more vulnerability in open conversations. I saw that you retweeted a tweet where someone who actually specializes in phishing and everything that goes around it, he actually fell for a fish, and he like broke down the entire thing and explained how it happened and explained like, hey, I get this too. I too am human, like all of us. And just having these conversations in public, I feel, is so important and so validating for many others who are going through these things, but may not feel like it's allowed to talk about them. And if we look at the big picture, and of course I'm biased because I look at these conversations and I've, had the opportunity to connect with you and so many other great people in this industry, which led me to many other great people. So I'm definitely in a bubble, although I try my best to step outside of it from time to time. Um, I was actually wondering if, broadly speaking, like when you look at the industry, if you feel like the conversation is changing and if you feel like things are actually changing and not just how we talk about these things and what things we actually talk about, like non-technical things, but if that actually permeates decisions in companies and how products and companies get built and how teams interact within themselves. I'm really curious about your perspective on this because you get to interact with so many leaders and so many other people from cybersecurity.
It's such an interesting thing when you take a step back and look at it. Um, there's been a big shift, and part of that is just we as professionals who've started when there wasn't an industry, so to speak, who were there when the industry started, and we've grown up with the industry. So 15, 20 years ago, when you had like the first B-sides and all those kinds of things, everyone was young, fresh faced, and they were excitable and they wanted to hack all the things and they wanted to everyone was out there having fun. Now, so many of those people are now leaders in a lot of the biggest organizations in the world. They're work for the government, they work for banks, they work for infrastructure companies and what have you. So they've gone through a maturing process themselves. Many people have had families, they've had kids. Some people have sadly passed away. Others have had their partners or people close to them pass away. People are getting like my doctor always tells me I need to watch my sugar levels and my blood pressure and everything. So it makes you feel more vulnerable as a human. So you grow a bit more appreciation that you're not invincible. Life isn't a game. And you become a bit more philosophical, I suppose, to a degree. But I think that helps you really, really understand how organizations, but not organizations, but people, how they work and what you need, what you mean to people and how your words can have an impact on people. And that's why I see so many of our, leaders now, they're talking about so many other things beyond just like, here's how you break into a particular product. But they talk about that, yes, but they're also saying like, have you thought about the personal impact on people when something gets breached? Or how do you treat your team so that they don't suffer burnout like many people have in the industry? So they've been through it, so now they're like very conscious of it for themselves, but also for their team. I was talking to someone who they said they're like a workaholic. They used to be, but now they've really tried to step back, and they're a leader in their organization. And they said that one thing that always used to bug them was having unresponded to emails at the end of the day. So once they finished for work and they had dinner and everything, they'd sit down, and even if TV's on or whatever, they just respond to emails to get them out of the way. And he goes, that's so bad because it sends a signal to everyone that I'm working all these hours. You're expected to work all these hours. And he goes, as soon as I realized that, I was like, no, I've got to stop this. This is like forget about it being unhealthy for me. It's unhealthy for the whole team and the message I'm sending out there. So I think these sorts of things are becoming so much more visible, and people are talking about these. And I think this has led to far more better integrated working within teams, within across organizations, and across the industry as a whole. And now when you go to some of these security conferences, there's tracks dedicated to, or many talks dedicated to mental health and well-being, avoiding burnout and stress, the human side. These are all like life skills, and people are just there to like look at each other and say, like, hey, we can hack computers, now let's hack our lives for the better. And I think that's a great thing that I see in our industry today.
I love that as well, and that's such a thoughtful perspective. It's the work we do shapes us so much. The communities that we live in and that we engage with, the people we surround ourselves with, that is instrumental to our development as human beings, not just as professionals. Like beyond cybersecurity, I see it as it's a servant leadership type of industry. We're here to help others. We're here to make their lives easier, better, safer, any way that we can, and that comes with a lot of responsibility, like you mentioned, but also with a willingness to take on that responsibility. And when we take that on for ourselves as well, and learn how to be compassionate towards ourselves, then we can learn how to be compassionate towards others, because it's never the other way around. It starts from within. If we don't have that experience and don't feel what it's like to be able to talk about things that make us vulnerable, to be able to let go of some past behaviors that may have served us well up to a point in our lives and careers, but no longer serve us now, that takes a while to process. It takes a few years, it takes a few life experiences to get there, and then to understand what actually helps and what actually makes a difference, both for ourselves and others. And if we thinking about that making a difference, I was wondering, because you so easily connect with others, but I was wondering if you remember like an instance in your life where it was difficult for you to like practice empathy towards another person. Because I feel like when people look at people like you who are so generous and they connect easily with people, they talk easily, they engage so much faster than they do, they feel like, oh, but he's a natural. I could never. But we all have moments where it's really difficult to be empathetic towards a certain person, a certain type of behavior. So, do you remember a time in your life when that happened and how that felt for you?
Yeah, I think like early on in my career and for many years, I was very, um, I think I was very insecure in many ways. And a lot of that was, I suppose, like youth, arrogance, and wanting to prove myself. And also, I didn't really. So, this was a time before I actually had any mentors in my life. So, I didn't have a proper, like, I didn't understand how you plan your career, how you make a difference, how you personally grow, how you professionally grow, how you mature in that regard. So I think when you don't have that mentor, you sort of like bounce around a lot. And so you spend a lot of energy, but you don't actually make a lot of progress. And so, I it would, a lot of it in work would be like, how can I make myself look good? Be that at the expense of someone else. And and there was this one place I worked, and it wasn't a very very good environment in the sense there was lots of young guys there, and it's always men, unfortunately, but they were young, and no one ever like um, backed each other up in the way the bosses never backed up their team and whatever. So it was kind of like a dog eat dog world, and so everyone was always on edge and what have you. And it's only later on, like when so I'd go into meetings and I'd be very happy to throw a colleague under the bus in a way, or like or not step in and say like, oh, have you considered this or that the other. And it's only when one person actually, he was like he was a contractor from Australia, but he was a really good program manager. And there was an incident board that I was involved in, and I was getting a lot of like really aggressive questions pointed at me by one of the business owners. And he stepped in and he diffused the systems, the situation so beautifully. He was like, okay, that's cool. Things go down. Here's a documentation. Our team provided our documentation to their team, so we'll review that and what have you. And I felt so good. It was just like a knight in shining armor cave, and he saved me from these like dragons. And I felt like so indebted to him. And for him, it was just like, oh no, mate. I was just like, this is why we do it. And I thought, you know what? This is like how you actually make a lasting difference. This is how you do it. You don't throw people under the bus. You don't, because no one remembers you then. Or you're not making a good impact. You're like hurting people. You need to remove the personality or the ego from the thing and say, okay, we've got a situation. How do we handle it? We can work out, and you can blame people afterwards, maybe, if you want to do a root cause analysis and see how this happened, and if you really, really want to blame. But let's not get into a shouting match in the heat of an incident or when something's really gone wrong and what have you. So I think that was kind of like a turning point for me. But before then, I was always very like all over the place. Like I said, not a lot of empathy, very like sort of like full of myself, as I suppose many young people are. I can't blame everything on youth. I suppose I was a bit of a dick, but it's one of those things that I think having a mentor or a positive role model or many mentors, as I often call it, a mentor board, have a board of mentors, so it's people that can help you in specific areas of your life, and just listen to them and what they have to say and take it on board. But I think more than that, I think be the one that demonstrates to others what good behavior, the change that you want them to be. It's very easy to sit in an ivory tower and tell people. But once you walk the walk, I think people respect you a lot more for that.
And this is why I'm so grateful that we got to have this conversation, and that I get to learn from you every time you write about something, every time you talk about something. I'm so grateful for all of the conversations that happen on Twitter before. We shall not name he who ruined it. I love the conversations that I see on LinkedIn with people who are really thoughtful, and they want to like have a nuanced debate and not just just create fake engagement and things like that. I'm very grateful because all of these have been instrumental to my education, and not just mine. See a lot of people who grew up, like you said, in this industry with the help of so many others, because we can do this in a vacuum and we're not supposed to. And if since so many work in networking,
Yeah.
both in technical aspects, but both in social aspect, they're just those two are such a good match. Thank you so much for everything that you shared today, and thank you for being just so honest and just like a great human being all around. I am just very happy that we get to have leaders like you in this space, and it's one of the reasons why I love doing this so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Andrew. That's so kind of you. And thank you for having me on again. I really appreciate it.